for tuning in. I'm so glad to be doing Advent with you this year. Yesterday was our first day of Advent, and Advent all it means is a season of waiting. We are waiting for Christmas to come. Christmas is filled with so much fun stuff. It's got family and presents and candy and cookies and all the busyness, but sometimes it gets so busy that it's really hard to remember and to focus on what's important. And that's why we do Advent, to just give us some time to really remember what Christmas is all about. And it's about Jesus, and that he came to earth as a little baby so that he could grow up and live a perfect life and die on the cross so that we could live forever with him in heaven. It's so amazing, and I want to encourage you to remember that this Christmas season, in the midst of everything going on. And so we're going to be the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at some stories from the Bible, from the Old Testament, from the New Testament. Part of what we want to remember when we're waiting for Christmas is there were so many people that lived before Jesus that were waiting for God to fulfill promises. We are really blessed to live in a time after Jesus's ministry, but there were so many people that lived before Jesus that were waiting for the Messiah to come, that were waiting for God to save them, and they had to wait, not just for Christmas once a year, but for the actual real first Christmas. They were waiting for Jesus to come to earth. And so that's partly what we remember in the Advent season, is how those people waited and waited and waited and waited, and God fulfilled those promises. And so when we're waiting for God to fulfill promises in our lives, we can look back at that and see how faithful and wonderful God really is. And so with that, let's go ahead and dive into our first story. Our first story has to do with a fruit. What do you think about that? Let's dive in. Let's see what our story says. Every story has a beginning. I'll bet you've read a lot of books that start with "Once upon a time" or "A long time ago in a land far away." But do you know how your story begins? You might think your story begins when you were born, but it goes back way further than that. It goes back before you were born, before your parents were born, before your parents' parents were born, before your parents' parents were born. In fact, it goes back before anyone was born, all the way back to the very beginning. And in the very beginning, there was almost nothing. No people, no houses, no animals, no plants, no you, and no me. But someone was there, and his name was God. And he was ready to write the greatest story that anyone has ever told. It's your story and my story and the story of every person who's ever lived. It's a story about how much God loves his people, about how far away God seems sometimes, and about the lengths God would go to get his people back. It's a story about God making the wrong things right and the dark things light. And as it turns out, it's also the story of Christmas. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to the beginning. In the beginning, there was nothing but God. So God looked around and said, "Let us take this nothing and make something." And that's just what he did. He saw darkness and said, "Sorry, darkness, I'm making light." And then he said, "It's good." He saw empty spaces and said, "Sorry, empty space, I'm making planets." And then he said, "Hey, that's good." He saw an empty earth and said, "Sorry, empty earth, I'm making meadows and mountains and creeks and rivers and oceans and daffodils and dragonflies and hydrangeas and hippos." He said, "That's all good stuff too." And last of all, he made the best part. Can you guess what it was? People. God made a man named Adam and a woman named Eve. They were special because God made them to think like God, to act like Him, and to be like Him. And so God said, this isn't just good, this is really good. Adam and Eve were like children to God, so it was no surprise that the first thing they heard Him say was, I love you. And Adam and Eve lived every day with God in the garden He made for them called Eden, until something went wrong. God had told Adam and Eve they could eat from all the trees in Eden except one. Don't eat from this tree, God said, or the world will fill up with wrong and darkness. Death will come very close, and I will seem far away. But there was a snake in the garden who lied to Adam and Eve. That's right, a talking snake. It's not wrong, the snake said, and death won't come close. It's just one bite. What's the worst that could happen? So Eve picked the fruit and ate some, and then Adam took the fruit and ate some, and they chose their way over God's way, and that's what we call sin. And immediately, everything changed. God knew what had happened, and His heart began to break. He went to check on Adam and Eve, but all they wanted to do was to hide from Him. They didn't want to see Him anymore. So God had to kick them out of the garden. God sent Adam and Eve out of the garden away from Him. And that might seem like the end of that story, but it's not. See, God had a plan to bring them back to the garden to save His people. And so before they left the garden, He told them a promise. He said, it will not always be this way. One day, I will crush that snake. And I don't know if Adam and Eve knew what that meant at the time, but now today we know what that means, is that God was going to send Jesus to earth to crush sin and to free people from sin so that we can be forgiven and live forever with Him. And that's what happened on Christmas. God did that. God sent Jesus. And so that's our story for today. I'm so excited to keep going through stories of the Bible with you. I'll see you tomorrow.